The barn was burning. Catherine Hale stood in the snow, axe in hand, watching orange flames claw at the night sky. Behind her, the cabin door hung open. Smoke poured black and thick into the winter air. She had rebuilt that barn herself. Every plank, every nail, 3 months of work. And now Samuel Briggs stood at the edge of the firelight, torch still in his hand, smiling. "Should have left when I told you," he called across the snow. She tightened her grip on the axe. Her breath came hard and visible in the cold. The wind howled through the Montana Valley, carrying embers into the darkness. "This land doesn't belong to you," she said. "Doesn't belong to you either," Briggs replied. "Belongs to a dead man." 3 months earlier, Catherine had been dying. Not from illness. From exhaustion. From hunger. From the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. She had been walking for 2 days through November snow, her coat too thin, her boots splitting at the seams. She had left Bozeman with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of belongings tied with string. Her husband had died in September. The bank took the house in October. By November, she had nowhere left to go. She was 34 years old, and the world had decided she was invisible. The cabin appeared through the trees like something out of a fever dream. Small, weathered, tucked against the base of a pine-covered ridge. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney, but there was none. The windows were dark. Snow had drifted against the door. Catherine stood in the clearing, shaking from cold, and made a choice. She pushed the door open. Inside, the cabin was freezing. Dust covered everything. The air smelled stale, like a place that had been sealed too long. But it was shelter. There was an iron stove, a rough table, a bed frame with no mattress. Shelves lined one wall. A rifle hung above the door, untouched. Catherine dropped her bundle and sank onto the floor. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. When she woke, pale morning light filtered through the dirty windows. Her body ached. Her hands were numb. But she was alive. She stood slowly and looked around with clearer eyes. This was not an abandoned cabin. It was a neglected one. Someone had lived here. Someone had cared for this place once. The stove was good iron. The table was handmade, sturdy. The shelves held jars of preserves covered in dust, tins of coffee, salt, flour hardened into brick. She found blankets in a trunk, smelling of cedar and disuse. She found tools in a lean-to outside, saws, hammers, axes. She found a barn, half collapsed, and a fence that had fallen into the snow. Whoever had lived here had left. "We're giving up." Catherine made a fire in the stove. She boiled snow for water. She ate sparingly from the old supplies, rationing what little remained. And then she made a second choice. If this place could shelter her, she would repay it. She spent the first week simply surviving, gathering firewood, melting snow, sleeping 16 hours a day as her body recovered. But by the second week, she began to work. She patched the roof where wind had torn shingles loose. She cleared snow from the barn and shored up the walls with scrap wood. She mended the fence line, post by post, her hands blistering in the cold. She did not know who owned this land. She did not know if anyone would come. But she worked as if it mattered. As if she mattered. By December, the cabin had transformed. The windows gleamed. The stove burned clean and hot. She had repaired furniture, organized shelves, and begun skinning rabbits from her snares to stretch her food supply. The barn stood solid again, ready for animals it did not yet hold. She woke each morning with purpose. She went to bed each night exhausted but whole. Then, on a gray afternoon when the sky threatened snow, a man appeared at the edge of the clearing. He was tall and lean, dressed in a heavy coat and worn hat. He rode a dark horse and led a pack mule behind him. He stopped at the tree line and stared at the cabin as if he were seeing a ghost. Catherine stepped onto the porch, her heart pounding. The man dismounted slowly. He did not speak. He walked forward until he stood 10 feet from her, his face unreadable. He was perhaps 40. His beard was dark and untrimmed. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray, distant, heavy. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was rough, like something long and used. "Catherine Hale. This is my land." She swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I was lost. I took shelter." He looked past her at the cabin, at the repaired roof, at the smoke rising steady from the chimney. His jaw tightened. "You've been here a while." 5 weeks. His gaze returned to her, sharp now. "You fixed the barn." "Yes." "Why?" The question hung between them, stark and strange. Because it needed fixing, she said. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned and walked toward the barn without another word. His name was Nathaniel Cross, and he did not want her there. He made that clear the first night. Catherine cooked supper, rabbit stew, biscuits from the last of the flour, and set 2 plates on the table. Nathaniel ate in silence, his eyes fixed on the wall. When he finished, he stood without a word and walked outside. She found him in the barn an hour later, unsaddling his horse by lantern light. "I can leave in the morning," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. "Where will you go?" "I don't know." He pulled the saddle off and set it on a wooden rack. "Winter's here. You won't make it to town." "Then what do you want me to do?" Finally, he turned. His face was hard, carved by years of something she couldn't name. "Stay until spring. Work for your keep. Then leave." Catherine nodded once. "All right." He walked past her toward the cabin, his shoulder brushing hers in the narrow doorway. She stood in the cold darkness, breath clouding the air, and realized she had just been given 4 months. 4 months to survive. 4 months to prove she was not a burden. The next weeks were careful and tense. They moved around each other like strangers in a borrowed space. Nathaniel worked the trap lines and hunted. Catherine kept the cabin, mended clothes, and continued repairing what was broken. They spoke only when necessary. But Catherine noticed things. She noticed that Nathaniel never entered the cabin without hesitation, as if stepping inside cost him something. She noticed that he avoided the corner where a rocking chair sat covered in dust. She noticed that he slept in the barn most nights, even when the temperature dropped below freezing. One evening, while mending a shirt by firelight, she found a letter tucked into the pocket. The paper was old, creased from being read many times. She didn't open it. She set it on the shelf beside the rocking chair. The next morning, it was gone. December deepened. Snow fell heavy and constant. They were cut off from town now, alone in the valley. Catherine baked bread, smoked venison, and organized supplies with quiet efficiency. Nathaniel brought in firewood and began repairing harnesses he'd left to rot. Slowly, the silence between them shifted. One night, as they ate supper, Nathaniel spoke without prompting. "The barn," he said. "You did good work." Catherine looked up, surprised. "Thank you. Where'd you learn to build?" "My father. He was a carpenter." Nathaniel nodded once and returned to his meal. It was the longest conversation they'd had. A week later, Catherine found him standing in the snow outside the barn, staring at the fence line she'd rebuilt. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No." He shook his head slowly. "I just forgot what it looked like when someone cared." The words were so quiet, she almost missed them. That night, he slept in the cabin. January came cold and merciless. The wind howled for days without stopping. They were trapped inside, the world reduced to firelight and the sound of wind against wood. Catherine sewed. Nathaniel carved, his knife moving steadily over a piece of pine. They didn't speak much, but the silence no longer felt hostile. It felt shared. One evening, Catherine broke it. "Why did you leave?" Nathaniel's knife stilled. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "My wife died here," he said finally. 2 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. Catherine's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. I couldn't stay after. Everywhere I looked, I saw her. So I left." "Where did you go?" "Nowhere that mattered." He set the carving down. "I worked ranches, drank too much. Kept moving. Thought maybe I'd stop feeling like I'd buried myself with her." "Did it work?" "No." She understood that. She understood the weight of a loss that followed you no matter how far you ran. "I lost my husband in September," she said softly. "The bank took everything. I had nowhere to go." Nathaniel looked at her fully for the first time. "You didn't deserve that. Neither did you." Something passed between them then. Not pity. Understanding. February brought a thaw. Then a hard freeze. The work outside resumed. Together, they cleared fallen trees, reinforced the barn, and began planning for spring planting. Catherine suggested expanding the garden. Nathaniel agreed. She sketched plans in the dirt. He nodded, adding thoughts. They were building something. One afternoon, while hauling wood, Nathaniel stopped suddenly. "You planning to leave in spring?" Catherine's breath caught. "You told me to. I know what I said. Do you want me to stay?" He looked at her, and for the first time, his expression was unguarded. "Yes." Before she could respond, hoofbeats echoed across the snow. 3 men rode into the clearing. The one in front was broad-shouldered, his face flushed from cold and whiskey. "Samuel Breaks." Heard someone was squatting on cross land. Briggs called out. Thought I'd come see for myself. Nathaniel stepped forward. This is private property. Funny, Briggs said. Word in town is you abandoned it. Land that's abandoned can be claimed. It's not abandoned. Briggs grinned. Looks abandoned to me. He turned his horse and rode off, his men following. Catherine's stomach twisted. Who is he? Neighbor. Been trying to buy this land for years. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Now he thinks he can take it. That night, neither of them slept well. The barn was burning. Catherine stood in the snow, axe in hand, watching everything she had rebuilt go up in flames. Samuel Briggs sat on his horse at the edge of the firelight, torch still in hand. You can't stop this, Briggs called. Land's mine now. No, Nathaniel said, stepping out of the shadows behind Briggs. It's not. Briggs spun his horse. Nathaniel held a rifle, aimed steady. Get off my land, Nathaniel said. Briggs laughed. You gonna shoot me, Cross? In front of witnesses? If I have to. The two men with Briggs shifted nervously. This had been about intimidation, not bloodshed. This land's been abandoned 2 years, Briggs said. I filed a claim. I never abandoned it. Nathaniel's voice was cold. I left. There's a difference. You can't prove that. I can. Catherine stepped forward, holding a stack of papers. Tax records. Paid every year. Supply orders. Correspondence with the land office. She had found them in the trunk weeks ago and kept them safe. Briggs' face darkened. Doesn't matter. You're squatting. She's squatting. She's my wife, Nathaniel said. The words hit Catherine like a thunderclap. She stared at him. Nathaniel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Briggs. We married in January. Legal and recorded. This is her land as much as mine. It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that carried weight. Briggs' jaw worked. He looked at the burning barn, at Nathaniel's rifle, at his own men who were already backing their horses away. This isn't over, Briggs said. Yes, Nathaniel replied. It is. Briggs turned his horse and rode into the darkness. His men followed. Catherine and Nathaniel stood in silence, watching the barn burn. There was nothing they could do to save it now. I'm sorry, Nathaniel said quietly. It's just wood, Catherine replied. We'll rebuild. He finally looked at her. I shouldn't have said that. About us being married. Why did you? Because it was the only thing that would make him leave. She studied his face in the firelight. Was it? Nathaniel lowered the rifle. No. The barn collapsed inward with a roar of sparks. I meant it, he said. If you'll have me. Catherine's throat tightened. I'll have you. He reached for her hand. She took it. They stood together as the fire burned itself out, and the first light of dawn began to touch the mountains. Spring came slowly, but it came. By March, they had cleared the remains of the barn and begun building a new one. Nathaniel hired 2 men from town. Catherine worked alongside them, her hands blistered but strong. In April, they married for real. The ceremony was small, held in the cabin with the minister from Bozeman and 2 witnesses. Catherine wore a simple blue dress. Nathaniel wore his best shirt, cleaned and pressed. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. By May, the new barn stood complete, larger than the old one, stronger. They planted the expanded garden. They bought chickens, then 2 cows. Nathaniel rode to town and returned with lumber, nails, glass for new windows. What's all this for? Catherine asked. Thought we'd add a room, he said. In case we need it. She smiled. In case. He smiled back. Rare, but real. Summer turned the valley green and gold. The garden flourished. The animals thrived. Neighbors stopped by, cautiously at first, then warmly. Word spread that the Cross Ranch was alive again. Samuel Briggs tried once more to challenge the claim. The judge in Bozeman reviewed the documents Catherine had preserved and ruled in their favor. Briggs left the territory that fall. One evening in late September, Catherine stood on the porch and watched Nathaniel walk up from the barn. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. He climbed the steps and stood beside her. I was thinking, he said, about the name. Cross Ranch doesn't feel right anymore. What should we call it? He looked at her. Hale Cross Ranch. Both of us. Catherine's eyes burned with unexpected tears. Both of us. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him. Inside the cabin, the rocking chair sat by the fire, no longer covered in dust. On the shelf beside it rested 2 things. The old letter Nathaniel had carried for years, and a new one Catherine had written to her sister, telling her she had found a home. The wind moved through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and hay. The ranch that had been abandoned was abandoned no longer. It had been rebuilt, not just with wood and nails, but with something stronger. Two people who had lost everything had found each other in the ruins, and together they had built a life worth staying for.